Acting without certainty, the fifth capacity, after the map is gone. When we first talk about acting without certainty, well, it can sound almost clean, like a principle, a maturity, a hard-won wisdom. And sometimes it is. But living it is messier than saying it. It's not a poster. It's not a brave soundtrack swelling behind us while we stride toward history with our jaw set and our purpose clear. Most of the time, acting without certainty feels much smaller than that. It feels like not knowing. It feels like incomplete information. It feels like doing what seems most ethical from where we stand and then not being given any reassurance that we were right. It feels like moving without confirmation. It feels like deciding and then living inside the consequences of deciding. Without being allowed to go back and sample the unlived versions of our life. Because one of the hardest things about ethical adulthood is not just that certainty collapses. It's that options collapse. Once we choose, other paths close. And some of those paths were beautiful. Some held people we loved. Some held belonging. Some held safety. Some held an easier life. Some held a version of ourselves that we thought we might become. Some held the fantasy that if we just waited long enough or got a little clearer, life would eventually hand us a path that was both right and painless. But that path does not usually appear. So we choose. Or life chooses through us. Or circumstances narrow around us until what remains is not ideal, but actual. And then we have to live. This is where acting without certainty stops being an idea and becomes a practice. Because now we are no longer asking, what do I believe? We are asking, what is mine to do here, now, with these limits, with this body, with this history, with this power, with this grief, with this not knowing? And that question does not come with applause. It comes with responsibility. Sometimes the most adult thing we can do is not heroic. It's simply refusing to pretend we know more than we know. Refusing to call our fear clarity. refusing to call our exhaustion truth, refusing to call our desire for control ethics. Because once certainty falls away, oh, the substitutes rush in. Righteousness, urgency, purity, performance, despair, grandiosity, numbness, pretending to be wisdom. Anything, really, that saves us from the raw and humbling fact that we are acting without guarantees. We want a sign. We want proof. We want some protection from the possibility that we may give ourselves to something and it may not turn out the way we hoped. We may leave and lose more than we expected. We may stay and lose more than we expected. We may tell the truth and not be believed. We may repair and not be met. We may love and not be chosen. We may choose one life and grieve the love, the work, the children, the ease, the future that might have lived in another one. This grief is part of ethical adulthood, too. Not just grieving what was taken from us, grieving what had to be relinquished, grieving what our values cost us, grieving what reality would not bend to become. Not hardening because of it. That's one of the deepest forms of adulthood I know. Not becoming cynical because we were disappointed. Not becoming cruel because we were unsupported. Not becoming performative because we're desperate to prove that the cost was worth it. Just this. I chose, or I was forced to choose, and some part of life closed when I did. And I will tell the truth about that loss. And I will not turn that loss into bitterness if I can help it. And I will not lie and call it all noble just to make myself feel better. And I will not deny that there are versions of life I do not get to live now. That is grief. And it belongs here. Because acting without certainty is not just about doing the next right thing. It's also about tolerating the grief that comes from being unable to live every possible life. This is why the question, will it be worth it, hurts so much. because we usually cannot know. And no serious person should pretend otherwise. If our heart is leading us somewhere difficult, somewhere lonely, somewhere costly, somewhere unprecedented, somewhere where we have no map and very little company, we don't get to know in advance whether it will be worth it. We don't get to know whether staying would have saved something or simply prolonged its dying. We don't get to know whether leaving cost us the life we might have wanted. We don't get to know whether speaking up changed the room or merely marked us as difficult. We do not get to know whether the cause, the labor, the long, slow fidelity of our effort will bear fruit in our lifetime. We do not know. And still we choose. Still we act. Still we try to bring our life into coherence with what we can actually see. That's not romantic. It's not tidy. It's not innocent. Because once innocence is gone, we can no longer keep telling ourselves that well-intentioned is enough. Intention matters, and it does not absolve us. We don't get to say, I meant well, as if impact disappears. We do not get to say, I was trying my best, as if our best is automatically harmless. We do not get to say, everyone was doing it, as if conformity washes the blood off our hands. We do not get to say, I didn't know, when not knowing was convenient. The adult move is not self-condemnation, it is ownership. I acted. It had effects. Some I intended, some I did not. Now I remain answerable. That is ethical adulthood. Not purity, not certainty. Answerability. And answerability is exhausting when we are tired. Because let's face it, these capacities don't begin to get really strengthened and developed after we've been practicing for a long time. Most of us are well into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s before we begin to even think about these types of things. Usually we're in our later years and we are tired. That's just true. It's one thing to say that we should act ethically without certainty, and it is another thing entirely to try to do that. When our nervous system is cooked, when our life is overloaded, when grief is humming in the walls, when the culture is demanding performance, when the stakes feel incredibly high. And then it becomes harder to know what is ours to do. This is why capacity matters. Knowing our capacity is not selfishness. It's part of the ethics. There's a point at which the struggle itself starts eating the person. There's a point at which the fight flattens the humor, hardens the heart, burns through the body, and makes us less available to the very values we claim to serve. That matters. We're not here to become martyrs to our own goodness. We're not here to export our pain onto everyone around us and call it moral seriousness. We're not here to glorify depletion. Sometimes the most ethical thing we can do is step back before the work starts using us up in a way that makes us meaner, narrower, and less able to recognize one another. This too is part of acting without certainty. Knowing when to lean in, knowing when to pause, knowing when to rest. Knowing when the next right thing is smaller than our ego wants it to be. Because there's always the temptation to think that big feeling must require big action. Sometimes it does. But often, what is required is smaller, steadier, harder to brag about. Make the call. Tell the truth. Apologize properly. Stop. Refuse. Show up. Do not join in. Do not escalate. Feed the child. Take the walk. Put down the slogan and ask a better question. Stay in the room 5 more minutes without becoming cruel. Leave the room before cruelty takes over. Donate. Write. Witness. Vote. Sit by the bed. Bring the soup. Keep the boundary. Tell the accurate story. Repair what can be repaired. Mourn what cannot. This is where life is actually lived. This is where ethical adulthood either becomes embodied or stays theoretical. And then there are moments when what is needed truly has never been done before. Those moments matter too. Every generation meets some threshold where the old instructions fail. The inherited map no longer works. The rules are too small for the reality. The old language cannot hold what is happening. The need is obvious and pressing. The path is not. Then what? Then the question becomes, how do we do what has never been done? And the honest answer is, we do not know first. We find out while doing it. Much of what matters in history, in movements, in art, in healing, in moral progress in ordinary life has been done by people who did not know in advance how to do it. Here's what they did know. They knew enough to begin. They knew enough to refuse. They knew enough to imagine otherwise. They knew enough to say, this cannot remain the final word. They knew enough to expect correction. They knew enough to continue without needing immediate vindication. That's far more realistic than certainty, and far more courageous. Because certainty is cheap when it is imaginary. Courage is what remains when certainty's been removed and we still decide to move our body, open our mouth, make the call, tell the truth, or begin the work. Not because we know it will succeed, because not acting is also a choice. And that choice has effects too. There is no neutral. There is no innocent balcony seat. To wait is a choice. To remain silent is a choice. To delay is a choice. To preserve comfort is a choice. And those choices shape the world just as surely as the active ones do. So the question is not whether we'll act from a position of total moral purity. We will not. The question is whether we can act with enough honesty, enough restraint, enough answerability, and enough humanity that our action remains recognizable to us afterward. Can we still stand behind it? Not because of the outcome, not because it worked perfectly, not because along the way everyone agreed, not because it kept our image intact, but because given what we could actually see And given what was ours to do, it was coherent with what we most deeply serve. That's a very different standard than success. We're raised on success, on outcomes, on victory marches, on closure, on proof. But much of ethical adulthood, it just doesn't cash out that way. Sometimes what we get instead is coherence, not triumph, coherence. Sometimes what we get is that we did not abandon our deepest knowing. Sometimes what we get is that we did not betray someone to purchase ease. Sometimes what we get is that we didn't become cruel in order to feel strong. Sometimes what we get is that our humanity remained in conditions that tempted us to lose it. That may not look like enough from the outside, but from the inside, it is a great deal. And maybe this is where a different kind of hope enters. Not sunny optimism, not certainty, not the promise that everything happens for a reason, not the fantasy that justice always wins in the end. Something quieter than that, something more durable. Fidelity. Fidelity to what is actually here. Fidelity to what we can see right now. Fidelity to the dignity of others. Fidelity to the truth as best we can tell it. Fidelity to our own responsibility. Fidelity to the limits of our reach. Fidelity to remaining human while we do what is ours to do. This kind of fidelity, it doesn't glow. It does not trend. It doesn't always inspire. Sometimes this kind of fidelity, it's tired. Sometimes it is grieving. Sometimes it is plain. Sometimes it is all we have left. But it is enough to keep us from disappearing into spectacle or despair. And there is something else. When we act without certainty long enough, we begin to understand that no one gets to live an unlived life and also keep the life they chose. We want commitment without loss. We want truth without consequence. We want action without grief. We want freedom without relinquishment. But choosing is costly. And not all costs mean we chose wrong. Sometimes the pain is not a sign that we made a mistake. Sometimes it's simply the human cost of being finite. And if we do not understand that, we will spend years trying to reverse a grief that can only be honored. So now what? Now we keep walking. Not as a slogan, not as denial, not because we're sure, not because the ending is guaranteed. We keep walking because this step is still ours. And then the next one may be too. We keep walking because standing still in permanent protest against reality is also a form of surrender. We keep walking because our choices matter, even when they don't save the whole story. We keep walking because dignity is enacted, not merely admired. We keep walking because some things can only be discovered by people willing to move before the proof arrives. We keep walking because others may need our particular steadiness. We keep walking because becoming hard is too expensive. We keep walking because sometimes the only available hope is fidelity in motion. And when needed, we rest. We rest so the struggle doesn't become the death of us. We rest so that what's good in us remains reachable. We rest so we do not confuse depletion with devotion. We rest because capacity is real. And then when we can, we return. Not innocent, not certain, not guaranteed, but present. A little sadder, maybe, a little humbler, a little more able to tell the truth, a little more able to bear the fact that no path comes without loss, a little more willing to act anyway. This is not clean. This is not glamorous. This is not the story we were promised. But it is a life, a real one. And that perhaps is what comes after certainty. Not mastery, not arrival, not permanent clarity. Just this deeper willingness to choose without proof, to grieve what the choice costs, to remain answerable for what we do, to rest before the work destroys our humanity, to begin what has not yet been done, to let fidelity replace fantasy, and to keep moving, not because we're guaranteed the outcome, but because the next ethical step was still ours to take. That may be all. And in some seasons, that is everything.